Good morning. Sometimes you need a good stretch, right? Good morning. Good morning. Good morning to you all, and welcome to the OBX Wave Report. I am Robert Scribbler, your reporter on all things waves, weather, climate, and beach lifestyle. Some of my reports come directly from the ocean out here on my surfboard. And the reason why I'm here for you guys in the Outer Banks is to both provide you with comprehensive reports on wave conditions for the Outer Banks and well, I said both. There's like a few things that I'm doing here. So we're providing comprehensive reports on the wave conditions for the Outer Banks. We're providing you with a overview of weather conditions for both the US and the lower 48 and the North Atlantic. And we're doing our best to provide you with a broader view of the climate crisis. And there's two reasons for this. One is the Outer Banks sits right on the bleeding edge when it comes to climate crisis. The strand of islands here off North Carolina are little more than overgrown sandbars. And the sea level for most homes, the height above sea level for most homes is in the range of 5 to 8 feet, maybe. So of course, some homes in this region are higher up because you can get further up on some sand dunes, and there's a really gigantic sand dune out there called Jockey's Ridge that no homes are planted on presently, and hopefully never gets developed because it's a beautiful, pristine park that everyone can enjoy. But we've got big sand dunes out here that string off of Jockey's Ridge. So there are some locations that are higher up, but regardless of where you are in the Outer Banks as far as your own location, you're under the gun. You're under the gun for more severe storms rising up from a warmer than normal North Atlantic fueled by those hotter water temperatures and sometimes more unstable atmospheric conditions produced by climate change when you get hot next to cold. And we're under the gun here for sea level rise as climate change driven by fossil fuel burning threatens to melt the land glaciers of our world through the ratcheting effect of heating the atmosphere and heating the ocean. So we're right here. We're right here on the cutting edge. We're right here on the front line. If you live in the Outer Banks, you may not be aware of it, but you're, I guess, for lack of a better word, a climate warrior. You, your family, your grandparents, anyone who lives here, you've been enlisted involuntarily in the climate war by the fossil fuel industry, which has decided to double down on the extraction and burning of fossil fuels, which creates that ratcheting impact for the global climate system and for the Outer Banks here, and puts everyone here under the gun from rising sea levels and more intense storms. So for today, for the opener for the Outer Banks, we're gonna just take a broad view of some of the climate change related features that are happening now, the things in the news that are happening now that have relevance to those of us living here on the Outer Banks, but everywhere else. And particularly anyone who lives near a coast or on a coastline. It's not just about the Outer Banks. After all, it's about every place in the world that's near an ocean where people live. And that's most of the places, or many of the places where people live in the world or people want to live for various reasons. And for today, we're going to talk about heat, we're going to talk about storms, and we're going to talk about sea level rise in the opener. And then at the end, as we usually do, we're going to double down on the good action. We're going to implore you to do your best to help facilitate the rapid deployment globally of clean energy, that being wind, water, solar, and electric vehicles, which are the primary tools we have to fight the climate crisis right now. All right, so let's get into our opener here, and I'm going to start out with heat. Over the past week, the U.S. Southeast saw a mass of heat records fall, likely scores of heat records. And this article by Ian Livingston over in the Washington Post does put a pretty fantastic highlight on the heat records that were broken. I encourage you to read it. I'm not going to scroll down or do anything like that. But what I am going to do is just refer you to this article and talk about just a couple of the highlights in the article that jumped out to me. And the first is that we did have a massive spate of warmer than normal temperature records that were broken across the US Southeast. And this continued throughout the weekend, as well as we continue to see records getting broken in Florida, which still is the center of much warmer than normal conditions for the United States. And Ian, being a responsible reporter, also talked about some of the cold records that were broken out west. And this is one of the things that climate confusionists will tend to latch on. Anytime a cold record falls, they'll say, oh, well, it's a sign that global warming isn't happening, or it's just not real, or the Earth system's not warming. And of course, when a climate confusionist or climate change denier says this, they're saying it in bald defiance of facts, as the Earth system right now is about 1.1 to 1.2 degrees Celsius above 1880s averages, and that has not changed. So the Earth system is hotter than normal. And even in a hotter than normal Earth system, you get a lot of variance in temperatures around the globe. So sometimes you have some cold records that are broken. And in particular, this is the case in the middle latitudes, ironically, as the pole and the polar regions warm, because what happens is at the polar regions, when it warms, you strangely displace the colder air, particularly over the Arctic, which is an ocean region. So as the Arctic Ocean area warms up, you end up with this warmth in the Arctic that pushes the cold out into this band of troughs, basically, around the northern hemisphere. These dips in the jet stream, where the cold air, which is basically made an orphan, flees down to the temperate latitudes. So strangely, in the middle latitudes, as the Arctic warms, we get these variances of extreme between hot and cold, with this hot air running up toward the Arctic and trying to invade the Arctic. And you get these massive hot air invasions of the Arctic. And then as the center of cold there at the Arctic gets smashed by these hot air invasions, you get these little remnants, basically refugees of cold that flee down to the temperate latitudes. And so we get these extremes. We get this remnant refugee remnant refugee cold, and this burgeoning heat that's trying to smash the center of winter there at the pole. And so Ian is reporting on this. This is kind of an aspect of the changing climate. But one important note is that typically what we have seen is that heat records have outpaced cold records. And this is not only an indicator of the larger warming Earth system, but it also shows how the trends are moving, where we're heading more and more toward a hotter world, despite the fact that we get this extreme variance as the heat and the cold clash. And so I encourage you to read this article by Ian. It is a snapshot of the climate crisis that is ongoing now. Now let's talk a little bit more about the heat and the cold. And I'm going to pull up Scott Duncan here from Weather Extremes. And his statement is temperature contrast in North America is huge. Summer-like temperatures smashing heat records in the southern USA, while northern and western states are under winter storm warnings, with the entirety of Canada freezing. And again, this is a aspect of the progression of the climate crisis, is that center of cold in the Arctic has gotten those warm air invasions. The cold air, in some cases, in this case, has fled out to the middle latitudes. And we've seen that here in Canada and the western US. But meanwhile, for the US Southeast, we've got this extreme heat and very vividly displayed here in the graphic. And I'm going to see if I can zoom in on the graphic for you guys. I don't know if it's going to load for me. Doesn't appear to be loading. But in any case, it's very vividly displayed in this graphic by Scott Duncan. And for some reason, I've lost the animation on this graphic. It's possible that I've overloaded my computer. But nonetheless, yes, we've had very extreme heat. And this is just for the United States. And very extreme heat in the southeast and extreme cold for the West and for parts of Canada. And I don't know. I've talked context here, so you know what? One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to do something. I'm going to do a Google search and bring up Climate Reanalyzer because I do want to show you the global heat and cold balance for today. And we're just going to look at the weather maps for today. And oops. So yeah, weather map. That's not the one I want to look at. So let's just go to Climate Reanalyzer and look at today's weather maps and look at the 2-meter temperature anomaly for the world. And this is a Mercator projection of the Earth. And here you can see the balance of hot and cold. And right now, you've got these warmer than normal temperatures across the southeast. You've got colder than normal temperatures for the US West, colder than normal temperatures for parts of Canada and Alaska. And look at the Arctic. This is an anomaly map, so you're seeing variance as the blue areas are colder than normal, the red and orange areas are hotter than normal, the white areas are about normal. And just looking at the global system, what really stands out is that big pool of heat in the Arctic, heat being, in this case, warmer than normal temperatures as the warm air invades the Arctic through various methods. And the secondary feature that at least jumps out to me is these pools of remnant cold. You see one here over Alaska, stretching down into the western US, one here over eastern Canada, like a little pool here stretching out over Europe, and then another one over northeastern Asia. And so these like basically fugitives that have just been driven out there, out of their home there in the Arctic. And then as we scroll down, we can look and see where the temperature variance is. And right now, the global system is 0.77 degrees Celsius above the 1979 to 2000 average. And if you translate this over the, say, for example, looks like about 130, 140 year time frame, you get about a 1.2, 1.3 degrees Celsius above average reading for today. But look at the Arctic, and that's in the global picture. And that doesn't sound like much, but it's actually a lot. I mean, for example, if you were in the Ice Age, 10,000 years ago, the global temperature would be about 4 to 5 degrees Celsius colder globally than it is now. So we're about 1/4 the difference between the period of time when most of human civilization existed, 1/4 the difference between that time and an ice age, but on the side of hot globally. So, and I mean, an ice age means that New York City is under a mile, 2 miles of ice. So so yeah, so we've warmed the Earth up 1/4 of that difference toward heat. So we're basically 1/4 of the way toward, I don't know, what do you call it, a heat age? And that's big. That's big for the Earth system. I mean, that is a big punch. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that in the weather, we're seeing that in changes to the weather, and we're seeing that in impacts to things like sea ice and glaciers. But I did want to call your attention to this. I was talking about how heat has invaded the Arctic and left refugee cold pools across parts of the northern hemisphere. And as I talk about this, I like to highlight the work of Dr. Jennifer Francis on the jet stream and Dr. Michael Mann and other climate observers and scientists, because I mean, my narrative here is informed by what the scientists and what the weather observers are pointing out. Right now I'm using Climate Reanalyzer, which is a reanalysis of global models that take real-time data and put them together. But let's look at the Arctic right now. The Arctic right now is 1.4, I'm sorry, 4, brain. Okay, the Arctic right now is 4.16 degrees Celsius above seasonal averages for the 1979 to 2000 climatology. And that is a 4-degree departure, and it is by far the biggest outlier for heat around the Earth system. The second biggest outlier for heat is the Antarctic at 1.3 degrees Celsius. And the third biggest outlier for heat is the Northern Hemisphere, which we are living in here now in the Outer Banks at 1.13 degrees Celsius. So if anyone tells you that climate change stopped or it's not happening, all you have to do is just go back to Climate Reanalyzer and take a look at today's temperatures. And you can also do a wonderful thing, which I like to do, is go to NASA GISS, which has a global monitoring system which provides annual reports on the global temperature. And if you go to NASA GISS, you'll find that last year was much warmer than average for the globe, and that this year is on track to be much warmer than average for the globe. And if you want to look at the daily readings, you can go to Climate Reanalyzer. And I will bet you that you probably won't find a single day where the world is cooler than normal. Maybe you'll find one day. I'll probably get a climate change denier and say, look, I found a cherry. There's one day where the world was cooler than normal in 2023. Maybe. I don't know. I doubt it. I look at Climate Reanalyzer very often, and I can remember maybe 1 or 2 days out of the last 12 years where I've seen a day when the world was cooler than average. So I've been looking at these monitors for quite some time. So have fun trying to find a day where the whole globe is cooler than average. So context is everything, and we're talking about context right now as we get into our OBX wave report for today. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was heat, and we've talked about heat. So now let's talk a little bit about storms, and I did want to call your attention to a very powerful tropical cyclone that was spun up out of the Indian Ocean recently. And this is Cyclone Freddy. It's a little thing, but it was a really intense thing. I'm looking back at February 19th in the global forecast system model here provided by Earth Null School. And I'm looking at this ring of red in the wind field measurements from the global forecast system model. And this red ring, this ring of heat, tropical cyclone, kind of a little bit, I guess in a way, I mean, metaphorically, a ring of atmospheric fire, not actual fire, but fueled by heat on the ocean surface, certainly here. Cyclone Freddy, which achieved maximum sustained winds in the range of 140 miles per hour before it slammed into both Madagascar and parts of Eastern Africa, dumping torrential rain and providing some very extreme impacts. Despite its small size, it was a compact Category 4 storm at its peak. And Freddy is one of many cyclones that have impacted this region of Africa. And it's also worth noting that Madagascar is one of the more climate vulnerable regions of the world. It has been impacted both by severe drought and extreme rainfall over the past decade. And this swing between extremes is very familiar, I would think, to people in places like California that are also experiencing those extremes. And these extremes are driven in large part by climate crisis, which, as it injects more heat into the atmosphere and the oceans, helps to speed the force and intensity of evaporation and precipitation. And so on the evaporative side, you tend to get more extreme droughts, particularly in certain regions of the world that are vulnerable to droughts. And in Madagascar, we had a drought and then a famine that was set off by, in large part, by the heating of the atmosphere, and that weather attribution studies attributed it in large part to climate change. And then more recently, we also had an attribution study that attributed the increased intensity and severe rainfall from tropical cyclones slamming into Madagascar to climate change as well. And so here we have yet another severe cyclone slamming into Madagascar over the past week or so, dumping extreme rainfall, causing that swing from drought to flood in Madagascar, which is driven by that increased force of evaporation and precipitation, and that tends to be highlighted in hotspot regions of the world. And the reason why I'm talking about this in the context of the Outer Banks is we are under the gun, certainly for more severe nor'easters and hurricanes. We don't yet have an issue with extreme drought here in the Outer Banks, but we do have an issue with climate change amping up the cyclonic systems. And I do want to call your attention to this study highlighted in Down to Earth by Akshit Sangamla. Hopefully, I am pronouncing this correctly. My apologies if I have not. But this recent article noting that Cyclone Freddy traveled from Australia to batter Madagascar, one of the most climate vulnerable nations. And I do want to highlight the recent study. Did I lose it? Oh no, where's my world weather attribution? Aha, yes, here we go. So I also wanted to highlight the recent study reported in World Weather Attribution on the issue of climate change and cyclones in Madagascar. And I do want to highlight one paragraph from the findings here. Actually, a couple of paragraphs. So the study looked at cyclone intensity, particularly with severe precipitation, and found that climate change had an impact on extreme precipitation in Madagascar coming from tropical cyclones. And actually, I'm going to read a couple of things here. Let's see. They found that two tropical cyclones, Anna and Batsarai, were influenced by climate change, and that the intensity of the rainfall was also influenced by climate change. And what the study observed was an increase in the likelihood and intensity of heavy rainfalls associated with these tropical cyclones related to climate crisis. And this study looked at meteorology, it looked at aerosols, and it looked at global temperatures. And the study noted that to determine the role of climate change in these observed changes, we combined observed observations with climate models. We conclude that greenhouse gas and aerosol emissions are in part responsible for the observed increases. So you can find a fingerprint for climate change on the cyclones. And these findings are consistent with future projections of heavy rainfall associated with tropical cyclones, corroborating the attribution finding that climate change indeed increased the likelihood and intensity of the rainfall associated with Cyclone Anna and Cyclone Batsarai. And so here again, we have another cyclone, Cyclone Freddy, emerging in the same region, producing intense rainfalls and very stormy conditions after two cyclones were found to have climate change fingerprints all over them. And I encourage you to follow World Weather Attribution to keep track of extreme weather events where we have a climate change imprint, as it were. All right, so we've talked about heat, we've talked about storms. I'm just talking about storms in like the news right now and some related storms that provide us with some context. Now I want to talk about sea level rise because sea level rise has been in the news a lot lately. And I say sea level rise, but particularly the melt and risk to glaciers has been in the news lately. I'm just looking at top stories on a Google search, and I'm just going to read you the headlines of the four here. So from Newsweek, Florida's projected sea level rise by 2100 is bad news for the Sunshine State. From Science Alert, ice sheet collapse at both poles to start sooner than expected, study warns. CNN, so-called doomsday glacier is in trouble, scientists say, after finding surprising ... And UN News, sea level rise poses unthinkable risks for the planet. The Security Council noting. The thing to remember is that the ice around the world, in Antarctica and in Greenland, in total represents about 200-ish feet of sea level rise if it all melts. And if the Earth system warms up by 6 degrees Celsius or thereabouts, most of that ice will likely melt over decades, centuries, and if we're lucky, millennia. And unfortunately, in the Earth system, once things start to get moving, they're hard to stop. And in the case of glaciers, when they get moving, they're hard to stop as well. So for us living here on the Outer Banks, if giant glaciers really get moving, our future really gets limited. And so these soundings in the news are clarion call to me for action on climate to save the beautiful coastlines that we have here and around the world and to mass deploy clean energy. And then for our last little bit of context, I do want to show you the sea level rise chart by Avisio. And it's worth noting that sea level rise at present is on average in the range of about 3.56 millimeters per year, which projected over the course of a century, if it were to maintain, is about a foot, a little bit more than a foot of sea level rise over the course of a century. But the problem is that this is accelerating. Just a few years back, the average rate of sea level rise was around 3.2 or 3.3 millimeters per year. And then back in the 90s, it was in the range of the 2 millimeter per year, 2.5, maybe a little bit more than 2.5 millimeters per year back in the 1990s. And so what's been happening is this trend line, which looks like a straight line, but is actually moving a bit, is trending upward as more and more glaciers start to melt and as more and more heat gets trapped into the ocean that thermally expands the ocean waters. And Aviso is a great benchmark for watching the impacts of climate change on sea level rise. What I will note is that we have had a long period of La Nina in the in the equatorial Pacific. And La Nina, as it cools the surface waters, tends to tamp down the visible thermal expansion of the ocean waters in the Pacific, which can bring down the averages for sea level rise. So as we get into El Nino, we might see this average for Avisio, the yearly millimeter per year average bump up. And it's worth noting that this millimeter per year average, basically you get a centimeter every 3 years. And a centimeter of sea level rise may not sound like much, but for vulnerable coastlines, that means a lot. That means a lot of cost for beach replenishment if you want to save your homes. Out here off the Outer Banks, we're seeing about 5.5 millimeter per year sea level rise. That's due to the way, so the oceans don't all rise in a uniform fashion. Some areas rise faster than others. Some areas rise slower than others. And here off the Outer Banks, we've got some current changes in the Gulf Stream they're kind of pushing water up against the shore a bit more. And then in addition, we've got more melt coming from Antarctica, which because of gravity actually causes sea level rise in the northern hemisphere to accelerate a bit more. So, but even so even though we're experiencing faster sea level rise here in the Outer Banks, even a small amount of sea level rise can have a big impact. And if sea level rise really speeds up and you get powerful storms on top of that, your coastal regions can suffer this like cascading series of impacts. Here on the Outer Banks, we've got some homes that are like getting washed into the ocean right now. And, um, for example, Ocean Drive down in Rodanthe is kind of famous around here. Um, but the ocean drive type places will multiply across the Outer Banks and across the coastal regions of the world as sea level rise continues and accelerates if it is allowed to. And when I say if it is allowed to, um, what I mean is that we can slow it down and or stop it if we halt fossil fuel burning rapidly and mass deploy clean energy rapidly. All right, so yeah, so this is my context day for the OBX wave report. I love context. We love all things context. Love all things big picture. And that's what we did in the opener today. We had a big picture analysis before we got into the OBX wave report, which for me is fun. It's fascinating. Science is fun and interesting and empowering. As Dr. Fauci, who worked to help save your lives from terrible diseases throughout his life, would tell you. If you learn more about the trouble, you can unfold it, you can unwrap it, you can shrink it down to size, and you can confront it. But if you run away from it and you hide from it and you deny it, the trouble just gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it becomes like a big Godzilla kind of thing. It goes, it takes a big chunk out of your life and your prospects. So, all right, let's get down to the wave report. And for today, God, wow, another beautiful day here on the Outer Banks, here out on the bleeding edge. What a beautiful place. The skies are, we're showing peaks of blue through some clouds, and there's some trees that are budding. We've got a bush out back that just shed a whole bunch of red leaves onto the ground, and it's just what a wonderful day. The sunlight is streaming down. The temperatures are in the lower to middle 50s, so still kind of cool. Winds are gentle out of the east. We've got some decent waves on the coast in the range of 2 to 4 feet, depending on your location. And then here in the central US over the Mississippi River Valley, we've got this big swirl of clouds from a strong weather system. And out west, we've got another swirl of clouds sweeping into the US West Coast, though. Thankfully for the southwestern parts of California, we have a respite for the severe weather that just recently impacted Southern California with just a lot of extreme conditions. I'd be interested to see if weather attribution does the recent spate of storms in California for a climate crisis fingerprint. I'd like to hear about that if World Weather Attribution does take a look at that. But in any case, here in the Outer Banks, good waves, storm system coming in from the west, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So let's look at the National Weather Service radar picture, and let's go ahead and yeah, update this. And we've got a storm right now threatening the Ohio River Valley with rain. Well, I say threatening, sweeping rains across the Ohio River Valley and parts of the Great Lakes, rains and then snow, rain south, snows north. We've got winter weather advisories up over the Great Lakes region and a trailing kind of like a warm frontal boundary here sweeping north and east toward the US Northeast. Here on the coastlines, we've got small craft advisories up for Nags Head and north, actually Oregon Inlet and north, so that includes Manio where I am. And then south of Oregon Inlet, we've got gale watches. Oh, I'm sorry, gale warnings. I said gale watch. We got gale warnings up as a frontal boundary approaches from the west. This frontal boundary to bring in southwest winds later tonight, possibly gale force winds later tonight for large swath of the coastline running from Oregon Inlet down into South Carolina. Looks like down past down to the North Beaufort region of South Carolina. So we've got small craft advisories and gale advisories up for looks like parts of West Texas has some West Texas, Southeast New Mexico, some winter weather. Oh, sorry, red flag. I'm sorry, I thought these were winter weather advisories. Red flag warnings, which means increased fire risk, which is that's not good. And then for parts of California where we still have blizzard warnings up for the mountain ranges running from Northern California down to Central California near the Fresno area as another stormy impulse sweeps from the northwest toward the southeast across Northern California. Southern California getting a little bit of rain, but it's not anywhere near as crazy as it has been over the past few days as you guys dry out and recover from that severe weather down there. All right. So let's see. Let's look forward. Looking forward in time for the next 7 days using the NOAA quantitative prediction forecast because we are weather nerds. We love all the weathers, and we love NOAA and all the great information they provide to us in the publics. And so looking at the 7-day forecast for rain gives us an indicator of storminess expected by the weather predictors, meaning the weather models. And starting with the US West Coast, the Northwest, and in, let's see, Washington and Oregon and Northern and Central California are still under the gun for severe rain and snowfall, with potentially very severe snowfall for the Sierra Nevadas in central and northern California, and also rather extreme precipitation for the coastal regions running from central California on northward. This big blob of red here over Tennessee and Kentucky mainly, and then parts of the Mississippi and Ohio River valleys is also an indicator for severe weather prediction over the next 7 days. So we'll have to keep a weather eye for severe weather in this region basically from the Mississippi to the Appalachians in the south central US, I guess. And then off the US East Coast, we still have a tendency for nor'easters to form. All right, we've gone macro, we've gone big context, we've done all the, wow, I'm going to look at all the crazy big things. And now we're going to go micro. We're going to go down to the coastline using our Google Maps for informational purposes. We're going to go down to Jeanette's Pier. I love Jeanette's Pier. It is such a cool place. But in any case, right now, Jeanette's Pier is experiencing wave heights in the range of 2 to 3 feet, with a primary swell coming in at 9 seconds and a secondary swell coming in at 13 seconds. So good waves today at Jeanette's Pier. Winds coming out of the northeast at about 14 miles per hour. That's an onshore flow, pretty light. It's likely rather glassy down there. Good, well-formed waves. Probably going to head down and get a little surf session today. Do a little, I don't know, freeze my bum in the winter North Atlantic with those cooler air temperatures in the 50s, but I don't know. I've been spoiled. I was spoiled during the extreme heat of the past week with warm ocean conditions, and so now I'm not looking forward to the 50-degree air temperatures, but nonetheless, I'm going to get out there because I made a promise to myself that I will do my best to improve. Right now, air temperatures right now about 50, 51 degrees down there at Jeanette's Pier. Ocean water temperature 53, warmer, which is nice, but 53 degrees is still cold for water. Weather conditions, partly cloudy, expected high today of 54 for the air temperature. We got a small craft advisory up front that's expected to sweep through tonight, bringing in strong winds from the southwest and likely rain showers late tonight or early tomorrow. And then temps throughout this coming week are expected to be in the lower 60s, which is pretty nice, pretty warm air temperatures there, warmer than normal. So a little bit of a climate imprint on that. And let's see, waves for this week are expected to be in the range of 2 to 5 feet, with the best days being Wednesday and Thursday, with 3 to 4, 3 to 5 foot waves predicted in the wave models for those days. We'll see if those predictions hold up, but nonetheless, that looks like some pretty good waves for this week. And so I'm excited to get out there and get on the GoPro with you guys and show you the wave conditions. As I move on down the coast, I do want to talk about one of the reasons why I moved here and decided to name the OBX wave report and then do the crazy thing of putting the GoPro on my surfboard and starting to provide you guys with observations from the ocean. And this is a little bit of a teaser. I'm going to get into this a little bit more as we level up our OBX wave report. But with the increased storminess in the ocean systems, the waves out there are getting larger, and that has a climate fingerprint on it as well. And here in the Outer Banks, we jut out into the North Atlantic, and so um, we're kind of out there where we're almost like a semi-permanent readout in the Atlantic Ocean for observing the the impacts on ocean and weather and waves. And as you get more powerful storms, you get larger waves. And in the mid 2010s, we had a pretty crazy event here off the Outer Banks where there were some extreme waves, and I'm going to talk about this, so I'm foreshadowing a little bit. And another thing that I want to talk about to you guys is the movement of the ocean observation systems to just off the Outer Banks as Woods Hole moves its monitoring from Massachusetts to the Outer Banks. So we're kind of in a hot spot here for ocean observation, specifically as the climate changes driven by fossil fuel burning. And I'm going to be here for you guys. I'm going to be out there in the ocean surfing and reporting on the changes as they start to take place. And in my heart, I have this hope. I have this hope that we will stop the bad things, that I and so many like me will still be able to have a life here in the Outer Banks, and the people who come after me will also be able to have a life. But I, I'm fighting for that. That's important to me. I love the coastline, just as I love my country, and my free democracy. And and you don't fight for what you love from the rear. You fight for what you love from the front. So that's what we're here for. And I salute the folks at Woods Hole and all the scientists and all the climate activists and all the clean energy activists. And we're gonna take it out. We're gonna take it out into the waves and the rising storms. But in any case, heading down, we're gonna talk about some waves a little bit more. We're gonna head it down to Rodanth. And right now, Rodanth is seeing waves in the range of 2 to 3 feet, with a primary swell coming in at 12 seconds and a secondary swell coming in at 9 seconds. Winds are out of the northeast at 13 miles per hour, which is an onshore flow. Air temperatures in a range of 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Ocean water temperatures in the range of 59 degrees Fahrenheit. Weather conditions right now are partly cloudy with an expected high of 56 degrees Fahrenheit. Rodanth right now is under a gale watch as we expect a front to sweep in from the southwest tonight. And I did provide a longer range wave forecast for Jeanette's Pier. In fact, Jeanette's Pier looks like really good spot for waves for the Outer Banks. Rodanth's not looking quite as good as Jeanette's Pier, which is interesting. But with those ocean water temperatures warmer in the range of 59 degrees, it probably is going to be more pleasant surfing down there at Rodanth. And we're going to also get high temperatures in the 60s throughout most of the week here in Rodanth as well. And then heading on down south to Buxton, which tends to be the big wave spot for the other banks, but maybe not this week. Maybe Jeanette's Pier will be the big wave spot. We'll see. Um, we got these swells, these majestic swells. They look like they're going to start coming out of the east, and we've got this big ocean that's full of storms now, and there's just a swell out there. So it's some of the swell is heading this way. It's not too crazy right now. But right now at Buxton, waves are in the range of 3 to 4 feet. So yes, Buxton is the big wave spot for today, but maybe not for the rest of the week. Primary swell is 13 seconds, secondary swell 7 seconds. Winds out of the east-northeast at 13 miles per hour, which is an onshore flow. Air temperature is at 53 degrees Fahrenheit at Buxton. Ocean water, woo, nice and toasty. I say nice and toasty. 64 degrees is not toasty by any stretch of the imagination. It just seems toasty for someone who's been swimming in 40 and 50-degree water for the past few weeks. Surfing in 40 to 50-degree water. Ah, God, I'm a 50-year-old dude and I'm doing this. This is nuts. But okay, 64-degree temperature down there at Buxton in the ocean water temperatures. Warmer, but you're still going to need your cold weather gear, so make sure that you protect yourself from the cold. Weather conditions at Buxton are partly cloudy. Expected high today of 64 degrees. So warmer down there at Buxton. We are under a gale watch at Buxton with that front sweeping in from the west. And we expect that front to sweep through tonight, bring some rain and some gale force winds. And I say gale watch, gale warning in effect down there at Buxton. So, and correct in retrospect if I said gale watch for Rodanth. So gale warning for Rodanth, gale warning for Buxton. Correction. All right, so let's get on into the Climate Prediction Center forecast for the next 2 weeks. We're going to look into the future a little bit before we start looking at wave models. So in the 8 to 14 day forecast, we do expect above normal temperatures to near normal temperatures here in the Outer Banks. So likely 50s, 60s average days for the next 2 weeks. Maybe some days a little warmer, maybe some days a little cooler. Down as we get down toward the south, toward the Gulf Coast, with that much warmer than normal ocean in the Gulf of Mexico and off the North Atlantic influencing, we have rather warm temperatures, hot temperatures expected with much above normal temperatures expected for Florida. As we head north and west with that refugee, I'll say refugee cold air driven out of the Arctic. We are expected to see colder than normal conditions for the US West and Northwest. And then for Alaska, with a warm air invasion heading toward the Arctic, we've got above normal temperatures predicted for Alaska. For the lower 48, we expect mostly above normal precipitation from west to east. No major hotspots forecast in the 8 to 14 day outlook, but we'll see. We'll see how things progress. Looking at the Storm Prediction Center for the next 24 hours, it does look like there's a slight chance of thunderstorms over parts of the Ohio River Valley, running in through like Ohio, Indiana, parts of the Great Lakes region. Nothing too major, looks like. We don't have, like there's a 5% chance of tornadoes in Ohio. That's a little freaky. I mean, okay, so we won't likely see tornadoes in Ohio, but a 5% chance is weird. 15% chance of severe wind events over a large swath, and less than 5% chance of hail in all areas. So some severe thunderstorms may spawn. Chances for extreme severe weather are low, but might want to keep a weather eye to this storm as it progresses because it is a strong storm in the 985 millibar range as it approaches the Great Lakes. I'm going to go ahead and run the model so you guys can see the progression of weather across the United States through the coming days. We've got this storm sweeping in to the US West Coast and another storm sweeping in to the Great Lakes with some severe weather. So this global forecast system model provided by Tropical Tidbits. Go check out Levi Cohen on the social medias. Tropical weather season is starting to heat up. Levi is a good person to watch during those times. And so we've got the weather sweeping in today for the US West Coast and that strong storm sweeping into the US Northeast with that frontal boundary being dragged behind. And as we get later into the day today and then into Tuesday, the front encounters the coastline. We get some storminess here in the Outer Banks with gale force southwest winds. And then by early Tuesday, early to midday Tuesday, the storm starts to head on out offshore as the stormy weather in the west persists with some really severe snowfall predicted on Tuesday for parts of California and the mountain regions, and then kind of a nor'easter here offshore later in the day on Tuesday that lingers for a little bit and then heads offshore. Um, and then into Wednesday, we get another storm sweeping in through the Great Lakes as the most recent weather in the West Coast heads east across New Mexico or Arizona and then New Mexico, bringing with it some severe winter weather. Thursday, we're expected to see some storms here in the Outer Banks with a warm front-ish event pushing up from the south, although just mainly firing off some stormy weathers as it doesn't quite get up past the mid-Atlantic. And then we have another strong low pressure system forming in the central US with likely severe weather for parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, um, let's see, looks like Arkansas, Missouri, parts of the Mississippi River Valley as we get into the day on Friday. This low seemed to be stronger in the model runs that I saw earlier, but 978 millibars by Friday, that looks like 976 millibars in the central US. That is still a very powerful storm system on Friday, so we should look out for severe weather for parts of the central US. And then as we get into the day on Saturday, this storm sweeps off to the north and east, dragging a front behind it and getting off the US East Coast. All right, so that's a roundup for US weather, mostly focusing on the US East and the Outer Banks. I'm going to go to the wave models now, and we're going to talk about the Outer Banks, and then we're going to look at a big wave event for the Central Atlantic. Right now, waves are coming in out of the east in the range of, looks like about 2 to 3 feet. For the offshore environment, looks like these waves are lining up great onshore with some of the waves onshore actually a little bit larger than the offshore swell. And then as the gale sweeps through tonight and then heads offshore, the swell orientation is expected to shift around to the south as we get into Tuesday with smaller waves north, larger waves south. And then as we get into day on Wednesday, the swell orientation sweeps back around to the east with very nice large near offshore swell in the range of 4 to 5 feet. In the coastal wave models, these waves look like they line up very nicely. So we might get some great waves by Wednesday. And then into Thursday, again, 4 to 5, maybe even 6 foot waves in the near offshore environment by Thursday. And then heading on into Friday, again, swell continues to orient from the east with near offshore waves in the range of 5 to 6 feet. So it looks like a potentially really good week shaping up for waves for the Outer Banks this week. I did want to show you this large mid-ocean storm system that is just producing large waves over like a huge swath of ocean. And I'm just going to zoom out so you can see this thing. It's just this massive swath running up from the Caribbean all the way up to Greenland. And so, for example, let's look near the Caribbean. We've got wave heights in the range of 6 feet in some of the north-facing beaches in the near offshore environment. And then heading out into the mid-ocean, significant wave heights in the range of 11 feet. And then as we head a little bit northward, like off of Spain and Portugal in the central North Atlantic, this large swath of 20 to 25 foot significant wave heights in the, well, I'll say maybe 20 to 24 foot significant wave heights in the far offshore. And then off Greenland directly, 39 foot significant wave heights with this massive storm system. I'm just going to advance this model so you can see the waves propagate toward Europe. And we're expected to see just a fantastic, I would say, just a nice wave event for large swath of the coastline running from Ireland southward through Spain and Portugal with Significant wave heights offshore into the Morrow in the range of about 11 to 12 feet for parts of Ireland, for parts of France, 6 to 8 feet in the near offshore environment, and then for Portugal and Spain, 14 to 15 foot significant wave heights in the near offshore environment. And it is worth noting the West Coast is still experiencing that northwest flow with larger swells coming in as the stormy impulses ride down. Some of those swells might wrap around into the Southern California area, and looks like the bigger waves are also running in from Central California on northward. Beaches today, not really experiencing much in the way of waves in Southern California, but the swell is expected to increase throughout the week. All right, so thank you for joining me for this extended session of the OBX Wave Report. We really got into all the things. I had a lot of fun talking to you guys. Thank you for joining me on my climate adventure and helping to support the message of the need, the vital, the burning need to mass deploy clean energy to help fight back the climate crisis, save our beautiful coastlines, and give ourselves all just better, more healthy lives by doing it. Better lives in the form of our economies, better lives in the form of our opportunities, better lives in the form of our risk of disease, and then better lives in the end. When it comes to looking forward, for our future, better lives as we fight back the worst effects of climate change and forge a sustainable, happy, prosperous future for we the people, for the peoples of the world, by setting aside the dark impulses of the moment and embracing the joyful and helpful impulses that support the long term. And we can do it. We can do all the things. We can mass deploy the clean energy in the form of wind, water, solar, and electric vehicles now. And then we can deploy the other things if there are other breakthroughs that happen. But we have the miracle systems now. We've got the energy from heaven that we can tap, for lack of a better word. So thank you for joining me again for this session of the OBX Wave Report. I'm going to get my stuff together and we're going to go out and get a little surf session today and hopefully get some great video for you guys from the coast. So thank you for joining me again.